about if we begin? And since many of you are new to MISTech webinars, which this is, let me briefly mention what MISTech is. Founded in 2016, MISTech has endeavored to aright the disposition towards technology within anthroposophy, while it also seeks to engender the research and development of what Rudolf Steiner called a mechanical occultism. That is, to find a way in which a machine could perform in the physical what has originated as a moral impulse of a nearby human being. That's pretty impressive if we can get there. Steiner also mentioned that threefolding would have to come about before such things would be opened up to human beings. But so much of our work today has been to address this underlying fear of technology. And to accomplish this, MISTech has formed multiple 12-week study groups, and we've published now 8 different study guidebooks. These study groups are offered for free 3 times a year. In case you didn't know about those, a new one is starting the first week of April. This year, our conference will be at Pine Hill Waldorf School. We have an annual conference, and it will be from August 9th to the 12th during the peak of the Perseid meteor showers. At last year's conference, our theme was artificial intelligence and human consciousness. If I were to try to summarize that, which is quite difficult, in just a sentence, I would have to say, the challenge of AI is here to bring us to truly face the question, what is the human being? So MISTech is happy to have you, Eugene Schwartz, to address this topic tonight. Eugene has been a primary steward and nurturer of Waldorf education worldwide. His love for Waldorf radiates from him with each initiative he undertakes. I first heard Eugene speak many years ago when I was a Waldorf parent at Pine Hill, and my 3 kids did their K-8 there. Of the things he said, one quip has always stood out for me. He remarked that as he was at the time visiting Waldorf schools and consulting, he had noticed, and this was during the 90s, that pictures of Rudolf Steiner were gradually disappearing while statues of Buddha were appearing. I spent 42 years of my life working in the computer field. I have long known that the day of artificial intelligence was coming. We've had artificial intelligence, or AI, in those awful answering machines, you know, press 1 if you want X, press 2 if you want Y. AI is perhaps the major player in the stock markets today. Despite all of humanity's preparations for this day, the launch of the chatbot system ChatGPT back in November startled not only the Waldorf world, but the world in general. Op-eds in major newspapers are addressing a growing dread of AI. My colleagues on Facebook have frequently posted in this past month ChatGPT's replies to their questions. Some of those are hysterical, but there's also a lot of fear I sense in people. Its speed, its clarity, its writing skills appear to be harbingers of a new stage of artificial intelligence that may transform almost every field of human endeavor, according to Eugene Schwartz, and according to me as well. Thus, MISTech We're delighted to have you, Eugene, as our speaker tonight. Eugene has been using his skills from being a fellow of the Carnegie Institute for the Advancement of Teaching as a consultant and mentor to schools worldwide. After getting his degree at Columbia University, he was a class teacher and then a high school teacher at Green Meadow Waldorf School.
Oh,
He has served as director of teacher training at Sunbridge Institute and has lectured on education at Harvard, Columbia, Brigham Young, and the University of Tennessee, as well as the Aspen Institute. So as you all hit mute again, if you don't have it already, please join me in welcoming Eugene Schwartz, and I turn it over to Eugene. Thank you.
thank you, Andrew. Thank you very much. And thank you all for coming. We have a number of people who are not here tonight, but will be watching the recording because we have people from pretty much every continent in the world, and the time zone doesn't always quite work out. But I see many old friends and new friends, and I'm grateful that on a weeknight you would be here. Let me just reiterate what Andrew said, that I have been a class teacher for many years, and with that comes two warnings. One of them is that I am a generalist. I'm not really an expert in much of anything, but as a class teacher, you learn about many things that you want to teach your children. You get interested in a whole lot of them. And above all, because you're with a group of children for so long, you also get deeply interested in child development and what challenges children are facing increasingly in our time. So I'll be speaking out of that, especially. As Andrew also mentioned, I have taught on the high school level at Green Meadow and Shining Mountain Waldorf School in Boulder, Colorado. And I've also visited many an early childhood program in my journeys to Waldorf schools, and I'm deeply appreciative of that work as well. So I will not only be speaking as a class teacher, but the second warning concerning my being a class teacher is it's very hard for a class teacher to talk about anything for less than 2 hours. So I may be working very quickly, and I don't have the luxury of the 2-hour period I'd ordinarily have. So it's been very interesting to me as someone who started online conferences 14 years ago and was told how terrible they were by so many of the leaders of the Waldorf movement, how with the COVID lockdown, so much has changed enormously at the last minute. And I would say that distance learning sucked out some of the humanity from Waldorf education, and it has not been altogether easy to bring it back. It's also made people who were often very irrationally fearful, now it's made them perhaps equally irrationally relaxed about online distance learning with their children or the children's own exposure to all of this. Another aspect of the COVID change was that the foundations on which Waldorf education is based, that is to say, anthroposophy, and the individuality who originated the school and anthroposophy, Rudolf Steiner, they have become less and less a central factor in the life of Waldorf schools. Public schools, which can only go so far because of legal or regulatory restrictions, but private schools as well. As we approach the 100th anniversary of Rudolf Steiner's death day in 1925, almost exactly 2 years from now, we are going to see a precipitous drop in the relationship of Waldorf education in the United States in particular to Rudolf Steiner. this is why I feel tonight I really want to speak very much out of anthroposophy in relation to artificial intelligence and ChatGPT in particular. I'm not stealing anybody's thunder because nobody in the private or public Waldorf school world is going to say a thing out of anthroposophy about this issue. So I feel things do need to be said, that this is a very, very critical issue. Now, in 1989, my graduating 8th graders gave me a parting gift, my very first computer. And with it came a lovely card filled with drawings they had done and all of their signatures, but there was only one sentence written, and it said, "Dear Mr. Schwartz, thank you for all you did and welcome to the 20th century," in 1989. And they weren't very far off about that either. And this is why I am so happy to be working tonight as part of a MISTech webinar, because this is very much the task of MISTech. MISTech is also working hard and selflessly to bring the anthroposophical society, the anthroposophical movement into the 20th century. And maybe the 21st at some point as well, but they're working very, very hard at it. Now, to set the tone of tonight, before I get into details about chatbot GPT, which is, I know why many people are here, I want to say something that Steiner brought in a lecture on karma and reincarnation more than once, but it bears so strongly on what we're facing today. He said that before a soul who has died and lived in the spiritual world is reborn, they work cooperatively with hierarchical beings, powerful spiritual beings, to change the world in such a way that they can incarnate into very different circumstances from those that govern their last life. And in general, the souls will not be working too deeply with those lofty spiritual beings who work with climatology and geology and change the world in those structural ways. But they will work especially with those spiritual beings of the lower hierarchies who are affecting the cultural life, the political life, the spiritual life, and in our time, particularly and importantly, the technological life. They are helping these beings guide the world so that the stage is set for those who are incarnating. Much as those of you who are class teachers on Saturday or Sunday will be drawing your blackboard drawing and putting out your drawing materials for the children, perhaps new main lesson books, setting the stage, mise en scène, for what the children are going to be learning that week. And then when they come on Monday, there it is, what they need to be able to go forward for the next days. This is precisely what the children who are on the earth right now have been doing for several centuries, and most intensively in the last century, 150, 25, 10 years before they were due to incarnate. They have created the circumstances that they need to fulfill their karma and to go forward, we might say, in their education as cosmic and earthly beings. So with that in mind, ChatGPT, artificial intelligence altogether, and all that is going to follow is very important for children to be exposed to. When is another matter. How is another matter. But I think that Waldorf schools made a terrible mistake in the last century out of a kind of fear-based mentality, simply rejecting anything technological, until one day they had 15 minutes or 1 hour to create a distance learning circumstance for their children. I don't think that's going to be repeated. And I find it interesting that in the registration form that I created, I asked, why are you coming to this webinar? In the past, people would have said, to see how I can protect my child from this horrible artificial intelligence. Very few people said that. It was much more about, how do we work with it? What role does a Waldorf school play in working with this? There is interest, and although COVID brought many tragedies, it did awaken in the Waldorf movement a new relationship to technology. So that's what I will be.
Go ahead and turn this off and go watch TV in my room.
I didn't get that. I think somebody didn't have their mute on.
That's correct. I muted them.
So, and I would want to say that I'm going to try to explain in non-technical terms what GPT is, and I'll be talking about that in a few moments. In the second part of tonight's webinar, I'm going to present a slideshow in which we're going to look at the cultural, historical antecedents and influences that underlie artificial intelligence, so that it's not such a perhaps shock to our system that it's here, to realize, as Andrew mentioned before, there have been many, many steps, some of them quiet, some of them quite public, leading towards it. And throughout the discussion, I'm going to be offering some advice, some tips, some help, I hope, to class teachers, high school teachers in particular, on how to work with and perhaps against GPT as well. And I'll certainly be offering as much commiseration as I can. Now, in the 1990s, the early 1990s, the Jewish Theological Seminary in New York City decided that they needed to install a computer system. And this was over the opposition of many of their students, most of whom were going to be future rabbis and had stayed away from technology and felt very concerned about it. So the JTS invited Joachim Borowski, a very distinguished rabbi, known for his worldliness, but also his simplicity of heart. And he agreed he would try to speak to the students and help them overcome their opposition. So the hall was packed, and he opened the floor for questions, and immediately one of the seminary students said, I don't understand how this works. Is this the devil behind this? I have a question. I type it into my computer, it's on my screen, and I push a button, and immediately a rabbi in Warsaw across the ocean gives me an answer. Well, how does this happen? What's going on there, Rabbi? And the rabbi said, it's very simple. You have a big dog, big dog, okay? You pull on his tail, and right out the other end, he barks. That's how it works. Oh, okay. Somebody shouted out immediately, what about wireless? And the rabbi said, exactly the same thing, only without the dog. So I hope I can bring such clarity tonight to what is artificial intelligence. Now, first of all, intelligence in the context in which artificial intelligence is meant has little to do with intelligence per se. It's really information. So we think of that while GPT was making its premiere, the intelligence balloon sent by the Chinese was getting shot down. And we heard this word intelligence being used. And the CIA, Central Intelligence Agency, was also investigating all these matters. And what do they mean by intelligence? Information. They're searching for information about an opponent, a rival, or even an enemy. And that is very much what artificial intelligence is about. So if you're a teacher, probably now and then you've played telephone with your class, or maybe you played it when you were young. You whisper something in a child's ear, and he whispers it in another ear, another, they go around and around. And if you have 25 or 30 children in your class, you're certain that the last child to speak will give you something that vaguely sounds like what you actually said and may make inherent sense, but is not exactly what you said at all. As it goes around, people hear it differently. And we know this is true of gossip, let's say, as well. Things get affected by the listener as well as by the speaker. So this is very much the game that a chatbot is playing. It is listening to the query, the question that you are asking, and it is immediately then going into a great telephone world in which it's trying to retrieve words that sound related to the words of your question and to create sentences using the statistical algorithms that are embedded in this system. So that is to say that if one were to have a sentence like, Joe Biden is, it could be an elderly man. Joe Biden is a politician. Joe Biden is most likely at this point, if I said Joe Biden is, you think he's president of the United States. That's most likely the kind of response that you would get. But there are many other possibilities. And statistically, again and again and again, this device, this pre-trained system has to be retrained and retrained and retrained because it's constantly making mistakes, jumping to conclusions, we might say. There are 175 billion parameters that are encased within this system, which then can combine in a variety of ways to create sentences and even very rapidly combine into paragraphs as well, and finally appear to be conversational. And this is what's most impressive and in many ways also most concerning about the ChatGPT, that it is conversational. It is not like Google just sending you to various other sources or books. It is not like Wikipedia giving you text which is pre-written, but rather appears to be speaking to you, and often remarkably, perceptively so, it would seem, though there again, many, many mistakes are made. So it's conversational tone. That's a very important new step, quantum leap, in this new system. Secondly, it's speed. Some people remark that it took them longer to type their question, which was 5 sentences long, than it did to receive a 50-sentence answer. That the speed is just astonishing. So time does not seem to be a factor here. There's a kind of transcendence of time, or we might even say a skipping of time. And what is it drawing upon? It's drawing upon a database, we might say, which is made up of all of the contents of the internet, particularly Wikipedia, and all social media that was in existence in the year 2021. And this is important. It's pre-trained. As the system exists now, it's always going to be 4 years, 3 years, 2 years, 1 year behind. And because it is pre-trained, it cannot correct its own mistakes. So here we can see one vast difference between human thinking and what we would term intelligence, and what this machine is capable or incapable of doing. In 1942, Jorge Luis Borges, a great Argentinian writer, wrote a book called The Library of Babel. And this book was based on the 19th century anecdote of the dactylographic monkeys. You know that one? In which it said if you sat 100 monkeys in front of 100 typewriters, this was late 19th century, and they could be there for eternity, or at least for a long, long time, they would eventually write every book that had ever been written. All of the works of Shakespeare, including some he didn't have a chance to write. All of the versions of James Joyce's Ulysses, all of Isaac Newton's work, all of Einstein's work, on and on and on, one could go that way, as well as producing a tremendous amount of nonsense, of having a page which just might have one letter on it, of having page upon page, millions, billions, trillions, with lots of letters, but no recognizable words, with lots of words, but no connection between those words. So Borges imagined this was done, and there was a library set up, which was filled with all of the books that the monkeys wrote. And the librarians had the task of finding which ones were actually valuable books, which were sensible, and which ones weren't. And of course, these librarians eventually all go out of their minds. This is what lives most deeply in artificial intelligence. You'd say, yeah, but there aren't monkeys sitting there. There are lots of people involved. When we say it's pre-trained, it's not being trained by another computer or a robot. There are thousands of people involved. All of you have helped to train this chatbot because it's using your social media. It's drawing on perhaps a correction you made to a Wikipedia article. It's drawing on everything that is out there, but it's in a form that is completely dead. It's not drawing technically on words. It's drawing on decomposed words, deconstructed words, words that aren't even technically letters. Steiner once said that thoughts, not the activity of thinking, but thoughts that we simply get from others, that these bring death into our circulatory system, that this is in a way a major cause of heart disease, of sclerosis of our circulatory system, dead thoughts. What artificial intelligence draws upon is deader than dead thoughts because it doesn't even have the structure of a thought. We could say it's drawing on zombified thought. And it's interesting how this passion for zombies has arisen at the same time online that artificial intelligence is making its place. Now, let's say a child is asking a question. It's looking at a screen, not at a human being. It's getting an immediate answer. As I said, there's no sense of time, and the screen is flat. There's no real depth there. There's no space. There is no space, there is no time. So when we are working with artificial intelligence, the two factors that are necessities of incarnating on the earth are not there. This is disincarnate. We might even say it's anti-incarnate. And children in our time have enough problems trying to incarnate. Karma is in such disruption in our time. And there are so many groups of children who don't exactly belong on the earth right now and so on. And this is only going to throw a spanner in the works, which are already having a rough time. So this we can see is something that we have to use judiciously ourselves, and also really help children as they get old enough to be able to use it. And that old enough is going to be younger and younger. We're going to have to try to find ways to really protect them. We could say that when chatbot gives you an answer and the answer has a mistake in it, okay, that wasn't such a good answer. I'll rephrase my question the second time I get the right answer. What happened to the first answer? It's gone back. It's gone back to its home with all of those words. It's a little bit of misinformation that has been recycled. And my question, which wasn't phrased correctly, is also being recycled. In other words, the possibility of there being increasing proportions of misinformation, of disinformation, of mistakes, and of absolute lunacy on that database grows greater and greater with every passing day, every passing year. Probably about 200 million people are using chatbot, many of them right now as I speak. So it is a system that is like a dust heap of thought, a dust heap of human endeavor, a dust heap of that most sacred phrase that Steiner speaks so often: in the beginning was the Word and all that Steiner means by that. And isn't it interesting that two of the art forms that Steiner introduced to the world have to do with speech formation and eurythmy, which of course is one of those rare forms of movement meant to move to speech as well as to music, to the point that Maurice Steiner said the Goetheanum did not need an orchestra pit because it was the house of the word, not the house of music. So the word, and here we see if indeed the word was God and the word was a God and the word brought light into the darkness, what this means that we are basing a new form of intelligence on words that have been destroyed, words that have been pulverized, and words that are then rapidly brought back in a completely dead form. And when the child goes to the screen and gets a response, however funny it might be, however clever it might be, there's no human being behind that. There's no sense of wonder, there's no awe, there's no joy, there's no sorrow. There's nothing there that we could possibly confuse for a human being, except that over the past 20, 30, 40 years, as we'll see in the slideshow, human beings have been excited to figure that they are more and more like computers themselves, that they are seeing themselves as hardwired machines. This is the way they're pictured. This is the way they're treated medically and so on. This mechanical world to which Andrew referred in his introduction. How can we meet this in a new way? So let me take a look at how a Waldorf teacher let's say in grade 5, right in the middle of things in the grade school, how would they teach children something? How would they teach their class? How would they reach an individual child? First of all, the teacher, let's say the lesson is going to be how Thales discovered the law of similar triangles, a transition from Egyptian history to Greek history in grade 5. So in the summer, the teacher began studying the so-called cultural epochs, ancient India, Persia, Egypt, and Greece. Got a general picture and perhaps started to read about some of the leading personalities in Greece at that time. Pythagoras, Plato, Aristotle, Alexander the Great. Thales might not have been the point of study then. But then during the weekend, she is going to be working specifically on Thales. So now she's taking the big picture that she's been living with since the summer, and perhaps it's March, she's going to be teaching this tomorrow on Wednesday. She's taken that and bringing it down to the specifics of Thales, whom she studies about during the weekend. One book probably won't be sufficient. 2 or 3 books, however short, will be needed because he's a bit of an obscure figure. What does it mean he's a pre-Socratic philosopher? Well, she has to look that one up. Then she realizes when he lived, he was actually a friend of Aesop, whose fables delighted the second graders. Say something about that. He also lived on the earth at the same time as the Tao Tzu was being written, that Lao Tzu was on the earth, that Buddha was on the earth. These were Thales' contemporaries. So the teacher is assimilating enough information to teach hours and hours, even though in the main lesson, she'll only be speaking about this for perhaps 45 minutes or so. And this is Steiner's law of teaching, we might say. 8 hours of preparation for every 1 hour that you teach, which is to say teaching is hard work, never-ending work, because all summer you're getting the big picture and getting ready for a new grade. Just when you got good at grade 4, now you're teaching grade 5. That's number 1. Number 2, because even though you will only teach 1/8 or less of all that preparation, it is living in you. And the child is assimilating it by osmosis. How is this happening? Because you and the child live in the etheric world together. Your etheric body is carrying the memories of what you are teaching. You are not using notes. You are speaking out of your memory. Another hard job for a Waldorf teacher to do, to develop a really strong memory consistently. So you're not struggling. Thales was, he lived, no, it's coming out smoothly. This way, you can enhance it with feelings. You can speak about Thales' curiosity. How tall is the pyramid? I'll go to the high priest and ask, and his disappointment, that number is sacred. We will not give a non-Egyptian that number. Be gone. And then his ingenuity, his power of observation, his excitement at high noon, seeing that every object had a shadow that was exactly the same as its height. Therefore, measure the pyramid shadow at high noon, and you've got the height of the pyramid. But the teacher has to have the memory forces functioning automatically, etherically, so that her astral body can bring those feelings, the joys, the sorrows, the excitement, the boredom, whatever it may be, so that the child can live in that life of feeling as well. And then the child lives with it. The teacher does not ask questions after that lesson. Perhaps tomorrow she will, she might even make 2 days, but the child gets to sleep on it. And what is happening in sleep? Well, here we have some anthroposophy to think about. The children go into the spiritual world, gather with their classmates, and there each child's angel takes what the child carries as information, as facts, as sentences, we might say. The angels take that and they bring that on the wings of the children's astral body to the archangels. The archangels build groups. The archangels live in space. The archangels take the collective memories that the children have of what they learned in the morning and bring them together. So what you have now, thanks to the archangel, is the class's memory, in which we might say the class is smarter than any single child, because it combines all of the memories of the children. Some have stronger, some have weaker memories. Some, because of their temperament, are more excited about Thales getting in trouble and going to prison for revealing the height. Others, because of their temperament, are more interested in the fact that Thales made a quick observation and so on. So the archangels take that information and turn it into knowledge. And then in turn, the archangels pass it on to the archi, the spirits of time. And the archi hold what they are given to be released later on. And we might say knowledge plus time has the potential of being wisdom, but it needs time. And then what happens when the teacher asks the children the question? She tries to ask a child a question that he or she will know, but it may be, so where did Thales go on that journey as a merchant? Where did he find himself? Persia? No, you're pretty close. We all, it's a place we learned about, Sally. Egypt. He went to Egypt where the pyramids are and the pharaohs. That's good. Very, very good. So some children have forgotten some things. Pretty much everybody remembers something, but a lot has been forgotten. And that is very, very important. And the angels and the archangels and the archi work together to help the children forget. Because if you don't forget anything, you can't learn anything. If you can't forget anything, you can't forgive anything or anyone. So forgetting is a critical point in learning, as is time, that it takes time. Give the children 1 or 2 nights to sleep on it so that they can convey what they learned to the spiritual world and bring it back as something new and strange, something that perhaps they're even surprised that they remember. And then the class as a whole takes those memories and they start to work together to create a composition. In grade 5, half the compositions will be written by the class altogether. By grade 6, 7, and 8, more children will write them individually, but only after there's been a lot of discussion of the children as a group so that their archangelic relationship to what they have learned can begin to arise in the life of the class. None of this, not one iota of this, is being done by ChatGPT. It does everything so quickly, and it doesn't have any relationship to the spiritual world. It only relates to the physical world, and only to the part of the physical world that is already most hardened and stuck and mineralized. And this is where we see that one reason that GPT has come into the world is so that we can begin to understand how a human being truly learns. And we understand that needs time and it needs space and it needs forgetting. These are, in a way, the gifts that artificial intelligence can give us. It's not to say, yeah, everybody's going to wake up and realize, Steiner's philosophy of freedom is the key. Well, no, but at least I hope that people involved with Waldorf education will be awakening to that and will recognize that something like ChatGPT and all that's going to follow brings the necessity, as it goes deeper and deeper into physicality, and we might say sub-physicality, we have to rise higher and higher into our understanding of the soul and spiritual nature of the child, of the human being altogether. And it's just so interesting that there is this kind of tragic crossing of the road right now, where less and less anthroposophy lives in the training centers, less and less lives in the Waldorf schools, as more and more things like DEI and bullying and probably also cyber civics discussing how to work with something like chat. More and more of this comes into the life of the school. There's no room. It's a zero-sum game. Even in trainings, there's less and less room for anthroposophy. And indeed, there's even a kind of reluctance on the part of those working with public school teachers to mention this at all, except in the most rapid way. I heard at a recent gathering of Waldorf public schools that hierarchies and esotericism have nothing to do with anthroposophy. Don't talk about that. And if somebody brings that up, don't even listen to them. That's not anthroposophy. So this is taking away, one might say, the fortress, the bulwark, the armor, all that a teacher needs to be able to understand artificial intelligence. And out of that understanding then, and out of their freedom as a teacher, find creative ways to help the children also understand what it is, work with it or avoid it if that's appropriate at a given moment. So this is what is so incredibly critical in our time, that we really are called upon now more than ever to understand how the hierarchies work, how the spiritual world works between human incarnations when we are creating the world we need, and then in that world itself. I'm going to take this a little bit further. Now, I have some slides to show you. Sometimes this can be a little bit glitchy on Zoom, but let me go quickly into it. Okay, I hope everybody can see this. And on the first slide, I've just given you my personal email. If you have more questions than we can answer tonight, iwaldorf@icloud.com, iwaldorf.net/webinar.html. That's the resource page in which I'm going to be placing a lot of articles and recommendations for further investigation into artificial intelligence. And then iwaldorf.net/online.html, the Waldorf online trainings for grades 1 through 8, in which we will be talking about artificial intelligence more deeply this summer. just giving AI the hype it's due, of course. Here is a painting of the Archangel Michael battling with the devil, we could say. Actually, Steiner says, a painting like this is a prophetic painting because this is in advance commemorating the deed of Michael in the year 1879, when he cast Ahriman out of heaven and onto the earth. So although the second half of Earth evolution since the time of Golgotha has been Ahrimanic in nature, it's been a gradual process. But after 1879, it's been speeding up. And by the end of the 20th century and the beginning of our own third millennium, it is moving more and more rapidly into the world. And we could see Ahriman representing forces of hardness and mineralization. He's surrounded by rocks in contrast to the rest of the landscape. And we could see his wings compared to the pinions that Michael has, hardened, fixed. Ahriman, who brings us to the earth and hopes to imprison us there. So let's see what happened on and before 1879. We're going to look at the history of the database. You probably recognize the gentleman in the middle of the group. The man, that's Abraham Lincoln, for those of you who don't know American history. The man on the right is General McClellan. The man on our left, Lincoln's right, was truly his right-hand man, Alan Pinkerton, who had saved Abraham Lincoln from an assassination attempt when Lincoln was on his way to his inauguration, and then became the head of the North, the Union's spy system. Very, very effective system. And then in turn, after Lincoln's death, worked more independently and began Pinkerton's National Detective Agency, which lives on to this day with the theme, "We never sleep." What did I say about letting the children sleep on what they've learned? What happens if you never sleep? That Egyptian style eye. And this was Pinkerton's great invention, the mug shot with information, a synopsis of information, vital statistics about these criminals or putative criminals. This was the first database ever compiled in the world. And this became, in later years, the basis for the FBI, its database. And to this day, probably you could find these figures in some security database itself. So this is where it began. This is 1901, but it was already there in the late 1870s. Information, data. This takes us back to the early part of the 19th century. These were the punch cards that the great Marie Jacquard developed to run his weavery so that human hands did not have to be involved in all steps, but very rapidly, depending on whether a hole was open or closed, the various fibers could move rapidly through and get woven together. This is the beginning of the punch card. Here we see someone working near the Jacquard loom with using the punch card. And now another individual often overlooked in the history of artificial intelligence, Herman Hollerith, German-American, 1860 to 1929, a contemporary of Steiner, one who lived just at the time that Michael was casting Ahriman to the earth. This was an individual who developed a much more rapid way of creating punch cards so that they could be used not only to run a machine, but to tabulate information. And indeed, the 1890 census of the United States was tabulated via punch cards, which made the tabulation twice as fast as the 1880 census had been, even though the American population was much greater and more complicated. And here we see in the 1930s, the Social Security processing system, where millions of elderly people had to have all of their vital statistics tabulated, so that in 1940, the first punch card type of Social Security check could be issued to this very happy couple. By the 1950s, one woman could produce all of the punch cards that it took that whole room of women to produce. And Andrew mentioned this to me a couple of days ago when we were discussing this, that punch cards, the punch card tabulation, put thousands and thousands of women out of work. Now one woman could do what hundreds of women were needed for before. And now the fear is artificial intelligence is going to put, God forbid, men out of work, white collar men out of work. Yes, it may happen. By now, Hollerith has died. The company's machinery is still called Hollerith. This is a Hollerith tabulator, but the company itself was renamed before his death International Business Machines. So this is a very sophisticated IBM Hollerith tabulator, which was actually made for German use. And it was used in the 1933 German census, which also was asking people what profession they were. The new leader of the German people, Adolf Hitler, was very interested in statistics and getting information and tabulating everything possible about people living in Germany, to a point where a special kind of tabulation machine was developed with a new kind of card. This is a 1941 SS Race Office punch card with a letter to the president of IBM. World War II was to be declared in the United States just a couple of months later. But IBM, under the leadership of Thomas Watson, maintained very cordial relationships with the National Socialist government throughout most of the war, because it was so profitable. The Germans needed an expensive tabulating machine at every concentration camp, not only in Germany itself, but throughout Europe. IBM made huge profits on the German race card tabulation devices. So we see it doesn't take long for technological development to get turned in an unexpected direction. Remember Pinkerton, the all-seeing eye. (1937) IBM poster, overview or have surveillance with Hollerith punch cards. And you can see one. Let me get that back. There's the punch card in the poster. Now we go a few years, 25 years forward, the Berkeley free speech movement, in which we can see the forces running the University of California, the millionaires and the military at the top, their pet dog, Clark Kerr, president of the university. Under him, a dean with the rule book in his hand, and a woman with a book called Chastity and an hourglass in hers. And there are the students moving in, intelligent people, high SAT scores and so on, going into the machine of the university, and with their graduation caps on, turned into punch cards, turned into information, which led then to the famous button of the free speech movement: I am a human being, do not fold, spindle, or mutilate. And the wish for something that would unite us, that would go beyond mere information, that would allow people to live, to use a term that wasn't there yet, off the grid. The great hippie Bible, Stuart Brand's Whole Earth Catalog, access to tools, which in a way carries something of a foundation of today's internet. But the concern about what punch cards and the very newly appearing artificial intelligence might lead to resulted in the movie 2001, A Space Odyssey.
I'm sorry, Dave. I'm afraid I can't do that. What are you talking about? This conversation can serve no purpose anymore.
That was 1960s. And now from that point, see, the distinguished MIT professor Joseph Weizenbaum, who developed as a joke, as a kind of prank, a deep learning program called ELIZA, in which it was possible for a person to type in questions to ELIZA, and ELIZA would act like a Rogerian psychotherapist, turning your statement into a question and helping you go forward on to the next. Weizenbaum was shocked when his own secretary locked him out of the room so that she could ask ELIZA questions. This was the beginning, the very, very much the beginning, though he regretted it deeply, of the sort of thing that we're experiencing in ChatGPT today. ELIZA, 1966 to 68. So you see how much was going on in the 60s. A movie that's often quite overlooked, THX 1138, the first film directed by George Lucas, which is about a world run by a computer with ELIZA-like capacities. The face of the computer is the face of Christ as painted by Hans Memling. And then IBM introduces its deep learning artificial intelligence system. And you could see there's that Whole Earth again that we saw in the Whole Earth catalog. And 2004 to 2011. And whom do you think it's named after? Why, of course, Thomas Watson, the collaborator with Adolf Hitler. This is where artificial intelligence finds its roots. And lest we forget, even Barbie proved that she does have intelligence, artificial though it might be, with a built-in microphone, speaker, LED lights, so that girls could have conversations with Barbie and she would listen to them. So that was developed in 2015, except things didn't go quite that well. And a few months later, its production was discontinued because it turned out that girls were sharing extremely intimate things with Barbie, and Barbie was kind of sending them back to headquarters. So there again, intelligence, facts, information, surveillance. Again and again, this comes up. And I just want to talk about the screen. There are a million places for them to look to find the right answers. Joseph Chilton Pearce, the great brain researcher, said, "The human brain is hardwired to learn only from reflected light. We cannot learn anything via radiant light, which is to say, the light of a screen." He said, "We learn by reading books. We learn by looking at works of art, architecture. It's all reflected light." And I disagreed with him on that one, because what about stained glass windows? It is very, very likely that many of us on the earth right now were alive when stained glass was first being produced, or when it was the primary source of understanding, of information about the world and about the life of Jesus and his family. And now we return, and we're still searching for a source of radiant light to keep teaching us. Look carefully at the stained glass.
What's day look like? Not bad. Only 2 meetings today.
Can I walk to the Belvedere Hotel from here?
Here are directions to Belvedere Hotel.
Read me that text.
Message from Sarah Russell. See you soon.
Say hello to Siri on the most amazing iPhone yet.
Siri. The word iris, Greek for rainbow, backwards. A Waldorf fifth grader would know that for sure. And also, Siri, Osiris, the great god of ancient Egypt, also beloved of fifth graders, who, due to the jealousy of his brother Set, was torn into pieces, thrown all over the Nile River, where they became sacred temples. iOS. And Ahriman. Have you ever noticed that Ahriman's name is rich in consonants and pretty poor in vowels? There are actually only 2 vowels in Ahriman's name, A and I. Okay, I don't want to get too conspiratorial here. So let's again look at this stained glass window we looked at before. Focus on the Christ child. Focus on the baby and his halo. Look carefully. There he is, coming back in our own time. And look at his aura. It's a clock, because of course you need time to learn. This is Tina Fey, the writer and comedian, and her newborn. And she just won a very prestigious award from Penn, the group of writers. I don't think the award, though, was for household organization. Okay, now I am getting, as I expected, at some point, a glitch. Okay, I'm afraid I'm going to have to stop here. I have a lot of other things to show you, but we'll have to do that sometime in the future. So I think I'm not even sure at this point I can get out of screen sharing. Let's see. No, I am completely paused here. All right, well, Andrew, can you hear me? Okay, so I think at this point it's 9:15. I should probably take some questions so we don't keep people up too long. And we'll have to
Right.
keep starting.
So let me just see if I can. Oh, sorry about that, Eugene. I did the wrong button. Can you?
Okay, that's all right.
Video?
I don't have my cursor.
No,
I don't
start
have
your
that.
video. Start your video. I'm sorry. Oh,
Okay.
if you can.
Hmm.
Yeah, thanks. And while people are asking questions, if you'd like, if you don't want to ask it aloud, you can either send it to me in chat or you can hit the Q&A button, or you can raise your hand if you don't mind speaking, and I will, when I call on you, then you can ask your question. So, and for now, we can put side-by-side gallery. That's I'm not sure how to turn off your screen share.
Oh, now it's starting to move forward. Okay.
Oh, beautiful. That's-
So let me just quickly go through this. I just wanted to show radiant light coming into the 20th century through the work of Rudolf Steiner and the colored glass windows of the first Goetheanum, which appear again in the second Goetheanum as well. He insisted that electric light be used to illuminate the cupola, the paintings on the ceiling, but that radiant light would stream through the windows. And I just am making the point that this is one of the things that we can do to help today's children work with stained glass, work with colored glass, make that a craft that they can work with in schools, the older children, which I think will help their need to experience radiant light, will be the light of the sun and not just the light of the computer. All right.
All right. So do you want
Now
to
I can
your
stop
screen share?
sharing.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. And now for the Q&A session, if you all would raise your hand or write your question. And Alice, you've got a hand up, Alice Stamp. So wait to unmute yourself until I call on you. So go ahead, Alice.
First of all, thank you both so much for this. Jean, I just had a question comment because all of this computer programs, they are programmed by human beings. That is that this
Yes.
is something and you can really question, well, who are these human beings who are doing these programs? And a lot has been said about that. But I wondered, it has been talked about that computers are beginning to speak with each other. And this has been a great concern. And I wondered if either of you had any knowledge or comments about, because, you know, I'm looking at both of you now, and I have this little iPad here. Well, how does that, as you say, how does that, what is it around these computers? What is it in the electromagnetic fields, for instance, and this huge satellites around the Earth that are enabling an incredible amount of interaction between electromagnetic fields, if not maybe other ones, but that that this uh, that we can be concerned about. What is it in the intelligence of these programmers that is creating as well um, these programs? But then, how is it with the computers themselves? Are they really able to interact with each other and do very strange things with what is programmed into them?
Well, let me
And
just read something that appeared in yesterday's New York Times. This is one of their, Ezra Klein, a perfectly
Yeah.
rational,
Yes.
thoughtful columnist. He said that we typically reach for science fiction stories when thinking about AI. I've come to believe that the real metaphors lurk in fantasy novels and occult texts. This is an act of summoning. The coders casting these spells have no idea what will stumble through the portal. What is oddest in my conversations is that they speak of this freely. They believe they might summon demons. They are calling anyway. And he says, I don't know that I can convey how weird that culture of programmers is. It is a community that is living with an altered sense of time and consequence. They're creating a power that they do not understand at a pace that they often do not believe. This is Ahriman. This is Ahriman at work. He's behind the scenes. He's concealed. He works very, very quickly so that by the time one is closing the barn door, not only the cows have escaped, but the barn has collapsed. And one sees the speed of this occurring and the incomprehensibility. And there are already hundreds of billions of dollars invested in it by corporations, by governments, for selfless purposes to give it away? Of course not. All for greater control, greater aggrandizement. And this is, I think, one of the surest signs that, as Steiner has said, Ahriman is going to be incarnating. He is going to be there in the flesh in a human physical body. And I think that this is, in a way, a kind of ripple, an echo of his work.
If I might add to that, I'll read something that Steiner wrote. The cosmic forces, so this gets to what Eugene was saying, the cosmic forces that are called forth from this direction, Pisces, Virgo, Sagittarius, Gemini, will beget strange machines, but only ones that will relieve the human being from work, because they will have within them a certain force of intelligence. And when you say speaking to one another, Alice, the computers aren't speaking, of course. There is a form of being able to transfer data between, and the programs on each of them are interpreting that information that is passed between the computers. Now, much of what we experience in our sciences are even trying to claim that what the world is just information. How do we understand that information? What does it mean to actually understand something? And this is what the great mysteries of these computers are. What is programming? And programming, and Anna will come to you next, Anna Masters. It in a strange way, programming is thinking about your thinking. You have to know what your thought process was to freeze it in order to then have the computer do essentially the end result of those steps with the information that's being presented to it. So software doesn't exist physically. It's where? Where does it exist? And Steiner called this a kind of sub-nature that is reflecting or is an imitation of the etheric. Anna, we'll go to you now. Anna Masters.
I think
Oh,
Roswitha has a hand up.
I think I
Yes,
got,
go ahead.
am I unmuted now?
Yes, you are.
Oh, good. Sorry, I'm a little funny with it.
Okay.
I was following you along there and because I've been studying mindfulness in Buddhism for really actively, and I just finished a teacher training program. And there's the Heart Sutra that talks about, emptiness is form and form is not other than emptiness. So I was thinking of that kind of like how, because Buddhism in some ways is so somatic and so earthly, but at the same time, the way out is in. So you're kind of like seeing the formlessness in the form. So in fact, you're kind of penetrating the physical to the infinite. You're kind of becoming so in contact with the physical that you see the garden that's there. And you kind of can have these bliss moments where you're not carried away by incessant thinking and whatnot. So, but I was thinking with that and the surveillance and how it's gathering this information, because I'm thinking, because Ahriman, you think of calcification. So I'm like, surveillance doesn't feel calcified to me, but I guess when it's just kind of acquiring the data and storing data. And then I kind of thought about this reflected light. So it's kind of like the technology is storing the data, like even Roombas now, some people are worried because the vacuum is taking secret images of the home and those are available on the internet, right? So like images of the layout of the inside of someone's home or their children playing, there's images that have been posted on the internet and people are aware now that those go into the cloud so that someone's vacuum is now like filming them. So so the surveillance is this reflected light that it's kind of using against us in a way to gain intelligence. But then I thought of Buddhism too, and I was like, there is magicalism. There's magic to Buddhism, and there is spiritual phenomenon. So one is if like in towns in Tibet, there was this one teacher I heard that would go there and they would meet a spiritual guru and the person was a tulpa and the tulpa was basically imagined into being. So the whole village had sort of like collectively identified a spiritual teacher and thought them into existence to the point where people could travel and then engage with this being called a tulpa. And it would be created out of the minds of the Tibetans who were imagining them together.
Anna,
Yeah. So anyway, I'm
you
just
ask a
thinking
question though, because
yes,
we're
sure.
almost out of time.
So
Yeah.
I'm just saying, are we saying Ahriman is kind of like a tulpa of our collective imaginings or engagements with AI? It's like it's being creative out of our engagement with it.
I wouldn't put it that way. I'd say rather the opposite, that we are being uncreated by our engagement with something like artificial intelligence. And Ahriman isn't a creator as such, but he's a tremendous opportunist. So something like the COVID epidemic, he took every opportunity he could to change society, to change people's attitudes towards a whole range of things. So the main thing that I'm trying to present is that we need to understand what a human being is, how a human being learns, how a human being functions, and especially the etheric world, the astral world, the ego, and the spiritual beings connected with that are thinking that way, are trying to live that way, out of those thoughts and those imaginations and meditatively. That is a way of, if we're a teacher, protecting our children, otherwise in a way at least of having a counter force in the world for the ever-growing harmonic forces that we're going to be seeing. So I'm not saying stay away from it or it shouldn't be anywhere near the school, but rather to recognize it's not the same as just having a computer and the internet. This is something different, and we have to be careful not to grow casual about it and just assume it's okay. A recent Pew Foundation poll showed 2,000 teachers were polled. 50% of them had tried ChatGPT. 40% of them were going to continue using it because it makes life easier, which is something that Steiner said has nothing to do with Waldorf education at all. The children should be working hard. The teacher should be working even harder.
Yeah. So Eugene, I have a question here from Elle, and then we'll go to Rosvita. The question is, what is the relationship a parent should cultivate at home? This is regarding digital screens for their children's use or not use.
It depends on the age. I would say certainly before 9, if possible, not at all, because the etheric forces are working so formatively still. And a screen just sucks that right out of the child's being. And it flattens their relationship to relationships, to what it means to talk to somebody, to ask somebody, to be amused by somebody, to be excited. And it's not good for the vision, which is just focusing on one flat plane and so on. So simply the older, the better. And with parental supervision, parental involvement that's there so that there can be a degree of guidance. And this is such an ideal picture that I'm giving. It's very, very difficult. So what's the solution if you can't give that kind of guidance, if you're too busy, and if you work with computers and they're always on in the house and so on? There is a solution, or at least there used to be one. It's called Waldorf education. Send your child to a Waldorf school where we hope the teachers are not using ChatGPT to create their lessons, where they are enunciating words they speak, where the child gets to do eurythmy and recites poetry and appreciates the value of human speech and the thinking that informs it. So Waldorf education is needed more than ever, but it's really got to be Waldorf education that is deeply embedded in anthroposophy, more than ever.
Thank you. Rosvita, it's your turn now.
Hi, this is actually Dale. I'm Rosvita's wife.
Hello, Dale.
A therapeutic eurythmist, and I'm working with a child right now. I just want to, it actually sheds light on a lot of what has just been said. This child is very much in his head because he's been watching a lot of screens, games, computer games, and so on. And he presents himself, he's very tired, and he's kind of awkward and clumsy. He will always try to ask questions or talk about something in order not to move. And I see, and he likes to fall down a lot. He likes to really just feel his body by falling down. And I see what is happening, and course, as a therapeutic eurythmist and trying to bring him into movement. And I actually talked about that by looking at the screen, he is sucked into his head. He's really kept in his head and not in his body. And bringing him into movement, which now he's starting to really enjoy, you can compare that with, it's now radiant light when he's in his limbs, the radiating activity. Whereas when he's just in his head, in the screen, it's this other light, and it's deadening. I just wanted to bring that.
Thank you very much. Well, one might say that here's a child with whom the spirits of form cannot commune. You know, that he's just constantly losing his form. The catabolic nature of the astral body is going to be very strong there. Here again, it's not that the astral body is streaming from the computer, but spaces, hollows, vacuums are created in the user, which then get filled by whatever elemental, whatever being happens to be around. And this is, I think, a big part of humanity today, that, you know, everybody's right here, like those people in the Siri commercial, and they are not really, they're not in themselves. He has no really.
Whoops. We may have lost Eugene.
I'm sorry. The